We all fear something. In fact, the number one fear that most people have is the fear of public speaking. And for that reason, you're glad it's not you up here. You're glad it's me. Now, when I first started out, of course, I was petrified of public speaking. I remember my first Sunday when I spoke in front of a church. It wasn't even my own home church. It was a church I'd never been to before. I was a guest speaker, and I got up in front of those people, and I was petrified. I mean, just sweaty armpits and knees knocking. I mean, it was horrible. And why was I afraid? What did I fear? I feared embarrassing myself. I feared letting Jesus down. I feared boring the people. I feared that I wouldn't do well. I don't know exactly, but all that stuff was going through my heart and mind. We all fear something. Some of you may think, well, at a certain point, don't we outgrow our fears? No, that was me way back in the beginning, and even to this very day. The idea of walking out here is a fearful prospect in some ways for me. Sure, what I do publicly plays to my strengths and my spiritual gifting, and I have a lot of experience. But just a few moments ago off stage, I was nervous, pacing back and forth. I always am nervous the first few minutes I'm on stage until I kind of relax and kind of get into. So even at this stage in my life and my ministry career, there is still a fear there. And this series is designed for all of us to identify fear, to identify other things that kill the courage in our life that we would otherwise have. See, I don't think fear is something that we're born with. In fact, I don't think we're born afraid. I think fear is learned. And I think because it's learned, I think we all want to be more courageous. Let me explain. There are at least three different types of fear. There's one that the Bible speaks of, and it's the fear of God. And that's a healthy fear. That's a kind of reverent respect for and acknowledgement of Him, and that's a good thing. And then there's the fear that we learn as we, are children and we grow up, and then we enter adulthood and we have experiences that teach us to be afraid of certain things, like playing on the freeway. Not a good thing, right? We have a healthy fear of fire and other things that may be harmful to our well-being. We're not talking about the fear of God or those kinds of healthy and constructive fears. This morning we're talking about the kind of fear that kills our courage, that robs us of bravery, that causes us to be afraid and maybe even paralyzes us and keeps us from taking a courageous step. Let me just ask you a question. What would you do, and in particular, what would you do for God if you weren't afraid at all? If fear of the unknown, if fear of failing were completely removed, what would you do? See, that fear of failure is the very thing we're going to talk about here today. Fear of failure, because it's at the top of most of our lists. When it comes to fears that get in the way of the expression of our courage and our bravery in living and approaching life, the fear of failure is a big one. And I think we need to rethink how we view failure to begin with. Failure is not something bad or awful, as if somehow it's to be avoided at all costs. No, it is an acceptable part of a normal life. Take, for example, the kid that's learning how to ride a bike without training wheels. What's the first thing they do after they go a few feet and the front wheel's wobbling all over the place? They crash. It's part of learning how to ride a bike. It's part of how you learn balance and finessing the steering. I mean, it's a healthy part of the process. When I first started speaking, I didn't do so well some of the time. I still don't do so well some of the time. And if you agree with that, just keep that to yourself. But when I first started out, I had some times that I was like, I didn't even like my message. I was bored with my own message, like right halfway through the message. And so there were things that I had to learn about being better at what I did. And so it goes. If we're going to be successful in any area of life, we're going to have to be willing to face the fear of failure and understand that failure isn't this bad, awful thing to be avoided at all costs, but it's part of the process, part of the journey from where I am to whatever the identified success happens to be. See, think about it for a minute. Everything that has ever been done or tried was done or tried by someone who did not know how it would turn out. Like, for example, the people that dared to think the world wasn't flat but actually round, and they sailed west from the known world, not knowing if they'd fall off the edge. You think, well, that's ridiculous. We know that was never going to happen. But they didn't know that. Or think about the first person that dared to fly, or dared to go under the ocean and stay for an extended period of time, or dared to go into outer space. The first people to consider that, the first people that tried that, the first people that ever successfully did that, did it without knowing how it would turn out. And there were failures along the way, but those failures helped pave the way to success. You see, failure can be and should be our teacher. Now, let me just be very clear. It's not always. Sometimes we don't learn from our mistakes, even when it would be helpful if we did, and it's a necessary part of setting ourselves up for success. But sometimes we allow our failures, our mistakes, our disappointments, we allow them to have a negative and a tragic effect on us. For example, we try something, and when we get done, it's just a colossal failure, and everybody says so, and we believe it, and we just say to ourselves, I'm never doing that again. Rather than saying, all right, that didn't work out well, we all agree that was kind of a swing and a miss, but I'm going to learn from that because I want to get better at doing what it is. Take, for example, Major League Baseball. So some of you recognize the name Babe Ruth. He was one of the early, all-time home run hitters. I mean, if there was ever a guy that you could count on to hit a home run more often than most other players, it was Babe Ruth. But do you know what else you could count on him to do? Strike out. The only way he got good at hitting home runs was by going for the fence, literally and figuratively, like swinging with all his might. And when he did that, often he missed the ball completely. Now some would say, well, he failed. He struck out. Yeah, he struck out a lot. But he hit an awful lot of home runs and won an awful lot of games. And a whole lot of Major League players followed his example in the years since, and even to this day. Often, a person who has a lot of home runs is also a person who has a lot of strikeouts. They weren't automatically a good home run hitter. They learned to be, and part of the learning process were the so-called failures or strikeouts along the way. See, when we let fear of failure keep us from taking that first step, we ride our bike for the first time without training wheels and crash and then say, like, okay, I'm not doing that ever again. I was afraid that might happen, and it did. So note to self, don't ever get on a two-wheel bicycle ever again. If we let that happen, we end up getting cheated out of some of life's best things. And more importantly, as Christ followers, we end up being cheated out of God's best. You see, fear of failure is a bully. It's a bully that's trying to cheat you out of God's best. Now, a lot of times I think what we do is we overly identify with our feelings when we have this fear of failure, when we're thinking, well, what if it doesn't work out? What if, I try and it doesn't happen? What if I make that call and I get rejected? What if I apply for that job and I don't get it? What if I reach out to that person and they tell me they don't want to talk to me? What if I take that courageous step and dare to be vulnerable and it doesn't go well? What if that happens? Oh gosh, I don't want to find out what would happen if that turns out like that, or if it doesn't play out like I hope it. I won't take the step, and we start playing it safe. We end up being bullied into a corner, and we're right where fear, especially the fear of failure, wants us. See, I think we overly identify with fear. Well, these are my feelings. This is what's going on, and so this is me. No, I want you to think of fear as an enemy, as something other than you. The fear of failure is not your friend. It may be what you feel, it may be a thought you're thinking, but I have good news for you. God does not want you to identify with that or own that or embrace that. In fact, quite to the contrary, God knows that that fear of failure will kill courage in your heart and in your thinking and in your decision-making processes and cheat you out of things that he has for you. For example, when I was a young man, I had the opportunity to say yes to Jesus in an environment much like this, and the man that I have never met, only heard for the first time that day, invited me to take a courageous step and open up my heart and ask Jesus to come in. And I was sitting in a church full of people that I did not know, but I decided to take that courageous step. And that first step toward Jesus was the beginning of a journey that has involved a lot of other courageous steps over the years. In fact, that very same day, I went up and met that man, and I said, you know what? I like you, and I like what I've been hearing, and I had plans to do something else with my life, but I'm going to change those plans. Where's your church? I want to come and sit there and learn from you and let you be my pastor. And so that man became my first pastor. And not long after that, I took a courageous step when God was leading me and presented to me an opportunity to go to Europe for a couple of months. And I as a young man, I quit my job. I took a leave of absence, and I took everything that I had to my name and went to Europe and followed Jesus there. And then there was, not long after that, the courageous step of asking Cindy to be my wife. And of course, there was that fear of failure. She might say no, and or I might not ask her right, or I might not say it right, all of which was actually true. But anyway, but she did say yes. And then we took the courageous step of going to Mexico as newlyweds, and then off to Bible college. And then out of Bible college, I took the courageous step of accepting an invitation from a guy who was going to go down to Southern California and take a church, and he invited me to come and assist him. And it's like, right out of Bible college, I'm full of idealism and hope and vision. It's like, I'm going to serve Jesus. This is going to be great. And we moved down to Los Angeles, and it didn't go well. In fact, it went really, really bad. The guy that I was with ended up with there was a set of circumstances, and he ended up suicidal, and it was just horrible. And I never got involved with that church, and I got a job, and here I was with my wife and my brand new baby, and wondering. I was very disillusioned. And God spoke to me and says, are you willing to take another courageous step? And it's like, okay, maybe. What's going on? And it's like there was an opportunity in Bellingham, Washington. And long story short, I said, yes, I'll pack up everything I own, my wife and my not even one-year-old baby, and I will move 1,400 miles to Bellingham, Washington, to a town I've never been in, to a town I've never lived in, where there are no people that I know and no church that exists, where I have no job, but I'll move there and rent a house and get a job, and I'll start a church. Like, what was I thinking, right? A big, courageous step. Well, I made that decision, and then the fear of failure started to really get a hold of me. This was in April 1977. April 1977. And I went to a men's retreat that April. This was my Bible at the time. Some of you remember these orange-covered New American Standard Bibles. They were the hot thing when they first came out. But anyway, this was one of my favorite Bibles at the time, and I had this Bible at the retreat, and I brought it out because the speaker spoke from Joshua chapter 1 right here. And I wrote across the top in the margin that day, Joshua 1 through 9, God's word to me at camp regarding Bellingham, April 23rd, 1977. God knew that I was nervous. God knew that that was a courageous step, and he wanted to encourage me in ways we'll talk about here in a few moments. But first, I want you to hear about some other people's courageous steps. We recently asked you if you'd be willing to share your courageous step, and many of you did, and we want to share a few of those with you right now. Let's take a look.
Everybody's step of courage looks different, and here are a few people's stories of their courageous step.
Hi, I'm Kevin. I just want to share that my courageous step was when my dad was not in my life anymore. I went through some abuse, and that I just keep growing in my life every day, and I choose not to be a victim, and I choose to be a survivor and keep growing in my relationship with my Heavenly Father.
Hi, my name is Jacob Lutz, and my courageous step was forgiveness and love. I grew up in a house full of verbal abuse, never good enough, never gonna make it, and through Freedom Ministries, the love of God, and a great family, I've learned to love, forgive, and carry on, and I'm going with Jesus.
Hi, I'm Cassandra, and my courageous step was walking out my front door this morning. I have been going through depression and being a recluse and hiding from the world and from God. And my courageous step is coming back and asking for forgiveness from putting God last. And it's time for me to put God first and come back to my church family. Thank you.
Courageous steps, for sure. A courageous step that they described that they took, but let's not overlook the obvious. It was a courageous step to stand in front of a camera last Sunday and say those things. Most of us wouldn't be comfortable. In fact, I'm one who's not really comfortable just when the camera's right there. It's just like, what do I say? You know, it's just an awkward sort of moment. And yet they not only shared in front of the camera, but they shared openly and candidly the courageous step that God was leading them to take. And when they took the step, will you notice with me, there was no guarantee of how it would play out. There was no guarantee of what would come. There's no guarantee of what they would feel or think or how other people would respond. They took the courageous step first and then discovered initially and are continuing to discover what awaited them on the other side of that courageous step. As I said, the fear of failure is a bully that will cheat us out of God's best, and someone who discovered that himself personally is a man by the name of Joshua in the Old Testament. And we're going to take a look at a moment in Joshua chapter 1 at what God had to say to him, if you want to turn there. But I want to just say this for those of you that don't know your Bibles very well. Joshua had the distinction of being the successor to Moses. Now, even if you've never read your Bible or a Bible, you know Moses, right? I mean, you can picture the Ten Commandments and the Red Sea, right? Charlton Heston, come on, somebody, right? So you know this guy Moses is this formidable guy. He's this leader of a nation. He's this man of God, this charisma, this charismatic, this powerful personality that God used in a big way historically. And Joshua's distinction, his assignment from God, is to follow that guy. Like, who wants to be the guy who follows Moses? That's a tough act to follow. And if you're Joshua, if I think we can identify with him, right? It's something that no doubt was intimidating. I mean, it was a daunting thing. It's like Moses has led us now for these many years as the leader of the nation, the spiritual leader of the nation, and the leader of the military might of the nation. And